One of the biggest misconceptions I hear from HOA board members is, I don't need an audit, or we never had one. And the reality is that Florida has very specific financial reporting requirements for homeowners associations and condominiums associations, right, Carla?
That's correct. And what that means, it depends on the total revenues for association. You may need a compiled, a reviewed, or audited financial statements.
That's right. And what surprises many board members is that this isn't just about compliance, right? This is also about being transparent, about having good financial statements and having a good relationship between the board members and the community that they serve, right?
Right.
So today we wanted to talk about it's becoming more and more prevalent these days about HOAs and the Florida laws, right? So we've had a lot of clients call, ask, and just really want to know what's going on, if they are required to comply. If I comply, then what do I need to do? So there's a lot of questions, right?
Right. And lately also there's been a lot of news out there, right? A lot of bad news, a lot of associations being in trouble, or board members for misusing funds, or whatever the case may be. So it's not only the new requirements from the state of Florida, but it's also, unfortunately, the bad press that these HOAs are getting for misusing funds, for example.
That's right, yeah, because just like everything else, right? If you're using somebody else's money, there's a bit of sensibility there, right? So, like exactly what you mentioned, there's misappropriations, there's, money being, stolen, or don't know where it is, all of a sudden the bookkeeper's become a millionaire overnight. So all of these things are happening, and it's important that, so Florida is stepping in, right? And they're making certain requirements, and it's really to protect the homeowners. That's, at the end of the day, what really is the goal here.
Exactly.
Right?
And the tenants not trusting their HOA, for example, that's another big one. That's a lot of phone calls that we receive almost every day. Right,
and there's natural friction, right? Because, we've all been, or most people have been part of an HOA at some point, you know? And if you get a letter or someone telling you, okay, also all of a sudden there's a special assessment, or the HOA went up, at the very least you want to know that those funds are being used correctly, that, that it's not to pay for somebody else's vacation, but actually to improve, the things that were meant, what, the money was supposed to be, the goal, for the money. And so there needs to be a transparent, a communication, and so this actually helps.
Correct.
To that, right? Because it creates certainty, and it creates transparency between the board members and the homeowners, or the tenants, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So having said that, let's start with why this matter. Okay, so important, right? So HOAs, what we mentioned before, right? They have homeowners assessments, they have reserve funds, they have vendor contracts, right? They're in a way handling the money, right? Maybe similar to something that a financial advisor would do, right? So, insurance expenditures, right? They're supposed to be keeping up with, the tenants or the owners. They're entrusting the board to make these decisions, right? To make sure that they're compliant and that they're running things smoothly, right? I'll give you one example. In the first community that I ever moved into that had an HOA, shortly after I moved, there was an accident. Unfortunately, someone passed away, part of an accident. It turns out that the HOA members, or the person handling the HOA, did not pay insurance. So because the insurance hadn't been up to date, they deactivated it. And guess what? We had a huge assessment coming in to pay for somebody else's mistake, basically. So I'm just kind of bringing up the point of the importance of why what the goal here is, right? It's one of those things that if you're not putting the effort, or you're not kind of being serious about it, it can have ramifications, right?
And we're also talking about a lot of money, right? It's
That's
a lot of money being used, and
Right.
from the tenants paying these HOAs, and you're trusting that they're using those funds correctly.
That's right. That's right. And then one of the first things that, HOAs do, normally is, because you might wonder, like, how do they come up with the amounts that you pay or the special assessment? It all starts with a budget, right?
Right.
And here up from CPA, we're big into, having budget is the goal that you set, right? It's kind of like your foundation to your financial oversight, to your goals. So setting up these budgets, it's important, right? And they need to be done properly, correctly.
Right.
They need to be realistic, so that you can reach whatever, so that you can maintain these things correctly, and you don't have to come up with big surprises.
Right.
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 In many cases, depending on how big the HOA, we can be talking about, from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to maybe even possibly millions and millions of dollars, right? So we can't emphasize enough the importance of taking this part serious when you're dealing with that kind of money, right?
Exactly, with other people's money.
Absolutely. So, and obviously, if there is no, if there's no protection there,
Right.
then you can only guess with what we just mentioned, right? Of some of the problems that have caused.
Or transparency, right? Because we want to be able to see the reports that they produce, make sure that they are following what they're saying. For example, in the budget, that you look at the budget to the actual and make sure that they're using those funds properly, and then if something changes, they need to notify you as well. So transparency is definitely the biggest thing, probably, as part of these HOA audits.
Right, exactly. So basically the law, so why this matters is because this law was created so that because the homeowners or the condominiums, they deserve to have the transparency how these funds are managed.
Exactly.
Okay? So let's talk about a little bit about the law, right?
Okay.
Which is maybe the first kind of the biggest question, right? Question mark. What is the law, right? And what are the thresholds, right? That's kind of like the biggest two kind of biggest question marks, right? So let's go through it's based on the annual revenue, right? And so it's basically how much money the HOA is coming in, right? So usually it all starts at about $150,000 mark. So anything between less than $150,000, all you need is a receipts and expenditures. Okay. So that's a very basic report, right? It's at the very basic to say, okay, this is how much came in, this is what we spent.
Much we spent, right?
Right?
Very simple.
Very simple, right? Any reasonable bookkeeper should be able to prepare that simply, right? But there's still someone is required to do this part, right? And just so that we are clear, this is basically the lowest hanging fruit. This is just the most basic, right? When you're talking about this report, there's not a lot of details in there. It's just basic accounting.
Accounting, record keeping.
Record keeping, exactly. So now, if it's between $150,000 and $300,000, we're talking about a compilation. Okay. So a compilation is basically, now we're talking about financial statements, right?
True financial statements.
True financial statements, right? So this is kind of like when the reason why we went to school, right? What's a balance sheet, an income statement, a capital account, a fund account, because normally they could be reserves. So now we're expanding from that simple report to a more organized and actual financial statements. Okay, but compilation means that we're just putting it together, right? Now, if it's between $300,000 in revenue to $500,000 to $500,000, we're talking about a review. So what's a review? So a review is when as CPAs, as auditors or in the audit industry, we start analyzing things,
Right.
right? Where before it was just simple report, now we're putting together financial statements. When we review, now it's come some analysis, right?
Right. So before it was just basically assisting in creating these financial statements, but there was necessarily no analysis involved.
Correct. Yeah. And just so that you're, important here is as we start getting more into like the review, and we'll talk about the audit, there needs to be some independence
Right.
from the auditor, right? Because you cannot, I guess the simplest way to explain this is you can't review your own work, right? Or you can't audit your own
you
work,
shouldn't.
right? Or you shouldn't, because there's a little bit of conflict of
Right.
interest there, right? So, it's, so now, but with the revenues, right? Because if we're talking about a review, which is something between $300,000 to $500,000, now we're talking about an HOA needing to have at least a bookkeeper, right? If not, maybe more. At least, an assistant or maybe even a bookkeeping firm.
Right.
That can help them here, and they're the ones that kind of putting everything together, and then you hire a CPA firm that can, do a review, right? Issue the review statement, okay? Now, if it's above 500,000, then we're talking about an audit, right?
Yep.
And an audit is obviously the highest level of assurance, right? That's when you're not obviously gonna go through every single transaction, every single invoice, but you are getting more into the depth of just kind of doing some tests, analyzing the whole process
Right.
to make sure that it complies with not only Florida law, but whatever internal bylaws the
Right.
HOA might have.
Exactly.
So is there a report? So we're talking about here that it's $500,000 or more. However, there could be a good reason why a firm or an HOA getting less revenue might benefit from
having
from
an audit. Right.
Especially if there's question marks about things maybe not being processed correctly, maybe not having the right internal controls,
Right.
being insecure about where some of the funds might have gone. If an HOA is in that situation, it could definitely benefit from an audit. Okay, but usually, if an HOA has 1,000 units or more, it requires an audit regardless of the revenue.
The revenue.
So, more times than not, if you have 1,000 units, it's probably going to be more than 500,000. But there could be a case where they're not having that much revenue coming in, but it's based on the units, you'd be required to do an audit. Okay, so these requirements fall under Florida law 720. Okay, that's the law that mentions when they discuss this requirement, right? And it's so Florida 720 is for the HOAs, where 718 is for the condominiums. Okay, all this is kind of all explaining there. It's very detailed, and it's where Florida bases their assessment into these requirements, right? So now that we talked about what it takes, we kind of mentioned a little bit high level of the difference, right? But let's get a little bit more in depth into, okay, so let's say a manager, you might ask yourself, okay, I'm within this range, like, what's the difference? So let's just do high level, right? So if it's a compilation, you're talking about no assurance, right? We kind of mentioned that it's just basically putting the financials together. Here it is. Right?
Making sure that they make sense, but there's no assurance of what's really behind the numbers.
Absolutely. But they put together professionally, right? You're having someone that obviously, hopefully an auditor that he has experience, that that knows all the nuances around financial statements and can present you with an actual professional financial statement and the opinion as well, right? So now a review. So now when we're getting into the review, now the CPA is doing analytical work, right? They're doing inquiries, they're checking things, they're double checking, they're asking questions.
Make sure it looks reasonable.
Absolutely. And by the way, so they may be asking maybe some uncomfortable questions, but that's the whole point, right? If during a review something becomes kind of, uncomfortable or, a situation where there could be differences or usually that's not a good sign, right?
Right. And especially if it's independent, right? If it's a new auditor starting, like for example, doing an audit or a review or compilation for the first time in your HOA, getting to know your bylaws and how you work, and so the questions are definitely inevitable.
Yeah, they're inevitable and they're necessary, and it's to the benefit of the of both sides, right? And then
Now I was gonna say, if you have an auditor that is not asking you questions or a CPA, then that's already a red flag.
That's a huge red flag. That's right. Yeah, good point. And obviously, the other side of that too is that as auditors, we're required to meet certain criteria to be able to give our opinion, right?
Right.
A review is not something that we can, let's say, upfront CPA makes it up and say, okay, I review this, right? There are certain criteria under Florida law and accounting governance that we need to follow to be able to issue these reports. That's also important, right? And then now an audit, right? Now we're talking about the highest level. So this is now where we're testing transactions, as I mentioned earlier. We're confirming balances. We're evaluating reports. We're checking controls, right? We're maybe going from where the transactions, where they begin. We track them, kind of do an audit trail, make sure they follow the right steps, as you mentioned earlier, the bylaws, for example, who signs checks, right? How do they get to, let's say, a treasurer? And then does the treasurer sign? Who reviews? Is the same person that approves? Is that the same person that pays, right?
Segregation of duties.
All these things were kind of being analyzed as part of an audit. And, obviously with more, let's say more work, more intensity in the work, the higher the cost. Right.
And more time.
It
takes more time, obviously, than a compilation or review.
Absolutely. It's just, obviously, with the review, as I mentioned, the requirements in our profession, when you jump into an audit, now you're talking about a whole new different line of requirements that we need to follow. And then obviously that takes, as you mentioned, more time, more effort, more of these things. So don't be surprised if, somebody quotes you for a compilation that is very different from an audit.
Right.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big difference, not only on the time, but on the price as well. And especially when you're hiring a brand new audit firm, when you switch from one firm to another, then that very first audit also takes longer than if you continue with the same firm for the following year, because now that firm knows your processes and how it works, and then the audit process will get a little bit faster. But that first year is always very time consuming. Absolutely.
And I guess, now that we're talking about red flags, if a CPA firm is quoting you very similar with a compilation from an audit, that's another red flag that you got to.
Or without asking a lot of questions.
Questions. Absolutely. So that's kind of big in our firm, right? It's we get some calls saying, okay, so I'm an HOA, I need a quote for my HOA.
Right.
And I need it by the end of the day.
Exactly. Because I need to present it to my board tomorrow.
Right. And that's not how it works.
No.
Right. There's a lot of components and variables that need to be reviewed and analyzed and checked before giving you before providing
a base price.
Exactly, a proposal or an estimate.
Right.
And we're gonna talk about, we're actually talking internally to set up, more discussions, maybe a webinar, right? To kind of talk more about what we've learned here from this side, about what these requirements are, what you need to look out as a HOA to get this right, right? For example, exactly what we're talking here, like if you're calling a CPA firm and without you providing much details, if they're already quoting you, chances are they're either not a respectable firm that is gonna go do things correctly and vouch for the information, or let's just say the worst case is not a fraudulent audit, which happens.
Right.
But so they cannot give you unless if they're already giving you a quote without a lot of information or without any information, it's a huge red flag.
Right, definitely. So we are working on definitely providing some education to management companies, to HOAs, because we do feel from the phone calls, at least that we get through our office, that people just necessarily don't have an idea how this really works and how it should work. Because at the end of the day, this is for your protection, right? So you need to make sure that you definitely select the correct audit firm.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've seen it, right? We've seen it where, an HOA gets a quote. Right. And again, with this issue, okay, just whatever, they just throw a number out there without any way to back it up or without any support, without anything. And then it becomes a nightmare. Right, because most likely the auditor is either what I just mentioned, right? It's either not gonna do the work and just provide you whatever,
right?
Or if they're actually serious, then they're probably gonna come, or somewhat serious, they're gonna come back and say, okay, so the estimate was way off.
Right.
We need to adjust. And this is bad, right? Because it makes the HOA create a lot of problems, right? Because this is a surprise situation where where sometimes these things get approved.
Right.
They go through the budget and all these things, and it's a huge surprise, a huge problem. They've already wasted time, money, efforts on this thing for it to blow up like that.
Exactly. So definitely when you're getting quotes for an audit, you have to take your time and you have to call several firms and get several prices and get the true feeling from the firm that you speak with. But this is definitely something that is time consuming. It's not a decision that you're going to make overnight.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, right? Meeting with the CPA firm that you're engaging with is also important. Okay, if we're talking about, it's just an email with cold situation. I didn't talk to anybody. Another red flag, right? And just keep in mind too that this is very specific to Florida. So, fraud, hackers, bad actors are aware that this is a requirement, and you gotta watch out for so bad actors, not being real CPA firms and all these things. So something to look out for. Okay. So I want to talk about a little bit of the consequences of ignoring it, right? Because it's another thing. Even some callers have, do I even really need this? Yeah.
I've never had one. Why do I need one now?
Absolutely, yeah. I separate this into two components, right? There's obviously the economical part, the money side, but there's also the trust side, right? The human side.
Right.
It's normal, right? If when you're dealing with money, you need to have protections.
Right.
You need to have controls. You need to have organization. If you don't have any of those, the chances are of theft, issues, misappropriations. It's obviously it increases the less of these controls that you may have.
Right. So make sure you have a reliable either management company or bookkeeper to make sure that the bylaws are being followed, that the rules are being followed, and make sure that your books are correct.
Absolutely. It takes obviously some investment, but it's the upside of not doing this and then possibly having money lost. It's tremendous. But very expensive and surprising, and it's just a big headache. So But the biggest, let's talk about the human side, right? The distrust, right? So as we, in our experience, having a mistrust between the HOAs and their members can be problematic, right? I mean, we've seen it in our experience, kind of, revolving door in terms of who's managing certain things, board members getting upset, homeowners complaining, threats, threats of lawsuits.
Even homeowners getting quotes themselves and not involving their management company or their bookkeeper. So tenants, like homeowners, tenants, really going out of their way to get some of this information because they just don't know. And that's already a red flag that they don't trust their board or their management company.
Absolutely, yeah. Finger pointing, all of these things, what they do is just cause problems.
Right.
Nothing good comes out of this. Right. So, being able to kind of put an end to that, where, okay, so we're going to start with them from a good place. We're going to be organized. We're going to have our CPA firm that's going to either review, compile, or audit. That's a very good sign or a move in the right direction, right?
Right. And you may have people that are considering buying a property there. Absolutely. And they will ask for financial statements, and they will ask if they're audited, because they want to make sure that they are going to invest in a property there, that their HOA is working the way it's supposed to work. So we've had that case too.
Absolutely. And that is especially true as the HOA's fees increase, right? If we're talking about moving into an area where the HOA is very low, the risk is low as well.
Right.
But, there are condominiums, there are HOAs where, there's a lot of services included in the HOA, and it's higher, so the chances of an issue there are increased. And so if just to kind of put it in simple terms, if you're going to move into a place where you're spending more than $1,000, $1,500 sometimes into an HOA fee, you want to know that whoever is handling this, they're doing it correctly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like exactly what you mentioned, we've seen cases where HOAs, they will say, okay, I need to get my engagement done. I need to get my audit because now I'm being asked.
I'm waiting.
to get this right. So it can be a problem if you're being reactive, right? If you're now just waiting for this to happen now I need to go find me a CPA.
Exactly. So you don't want to be in that position.
Absolutely. So the next one is the board exposure, right? So this is a big thing because, now we're talking about like fiduciary oversight. Is the board, their number one goal or the purpose of being is because they're watching out for the benefit and the security of the tenants, the owners, the association itself, right? So if the board is not acting accordingly, or they're going outside what they're hired to do or where they're organized to do, then obviously that creates exposure for them, whether it's legally, whether it's or problematic as within the community. It can be a problem, right? So definitely something to kind of look out for. And then another big one is lender and insurance, right? This is the same thing as it happens to us individually, right? When we go check for an insurance quote to, get a new insurance, or we need a lender because we need to invest into some kind of capital project, right? You do want to have all these organized in place. They will ask. They will ask for let me see your last audited financial statements. Who reviews your financials? If you don't have that, then the chances are it's going to be a problem obtaining a loan, right? And for example, a loan can be something very important if there is a capital project, something happened, something that was not unplanned.
Or if they don't have enough reserves.
Exactly. We live in Florida. We have natural disasters, right? There's a hurricane, a flood, something, the natural wear from the heat, certain things we didn't plan, it happens.
Right.
So having access to capital, it's important.
Right.
So then, management transitions, right? And it happens.
Big one.
And this is a big one. It almost happens every case.
Yes.
Almost. There is a relationship between management, the board, and the owners.
Right.
And it's very normal that maybe something creates some kind of friction.
Right.
Whether it's the management not being up to par with their services, maybe they don't have enough staff, maybe they don't answer properly, and it's normal that an HOA will move quickly and make changes.
Right, and we have even seen a case when a management company does go into a contract with an association and then they realize, wait, no, they are too small for me. So actually, I don't want to be your management company anymore. You have to find a different management company.
Absolutely.
We have seen that as well.
Because it's both ways, right? It needs to fit both sides, and it can be complicated, right? Board members at times, usually they're actually volunteers.
Right.
So the time that it may take them to, whether it's financial statements or, certain project or information that a management might need, there could be some delays, there could be some issues. So, there needs to be a good relationship and a good communication between all parties involved. So it's normal that, something kind of falls off the crack there, and then it requires changes.
And if you have good record keeping and clean books, then that transition should run pretty smooth.
Right.
That's why it's another reason to have clean financial statements, move from year to year properly with the correct balances, your accounts payable, your receivables, to make sure that everything is in line and that everything is well documented in case this happens. It's just a transition from one company to another, and that's it. It should be simple.
And this is such a big thing that we're probably going to do a whole webinar or class just about this topic, because that transition, it can be what causes problems in an audit. It's usually the number one issue that slows, delays the audit process. Or it may even requires additional scope within the services, because they may need to do a whole new bookkeeping because there was just basically no continuance in the financial statement.
Yeah, we have definitely seen that more often than I would like.
Absolutely, yes.
But yes, so this is definitely important. Watch out for that coming soon. Again, talking about educating these HOAs to make sure that they are doing things correctly.
Absolutely. So, the last thing we'll kind of touch on these consequences is special assessments, right? Because what happens with the special assessment is people start wondering naturally, why?
Why do you need one?
Why?
What happened?
Yeah, what happened? Like who screwed up?
Who messed up?
Yeah, it's normal. It happens every time. So having good financial statements can be the answer to that question. Without having to get into problematic answers or he said, she said, or kind of vague situation that only creates more problems than it solves.
Right, and something else that we see on these special assessments, for example, if they collect too much, what happens with that extra amount that we have? How is that going to be treated? And that needs to be a board meeting, voting, and there's a lot of processes that needs to be done just to work on those additional special assessments that were collected that were not used for a specific project.
Absolutely.
So there's definitely a lot of decisions that needs to have transparency.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we can move into when does it make sense, right? So now we're kind of just getting into the more common sense type of thing. Does it make sense to me? Does it not make sense to me? Right? So here's a bit of a practical guidance, right? So what we just talked about, if there's new management, I would say if it was up to me, I would make it a requirement, right? It's one of those, as we mentioned, is the biggest what causes issues, delays with the financial statement. So if you're in that situation, consider doing an audit. Okay, new board members, right? So this is usually those goes by the members go by certain terms, right? Voting terms. So it could be a situation where maybe just a few, there's a change. We've seen situations where there's a whole new members, right? All of them, everything new. And obviously when that happens, you're losing some of the history, someone that would know, like from past, maybe filling some blanks on some situations that we don't know.
Right, decisions that were made.
Exactly, and reasons, right? It's one thing to read, like, okay, this is a project that happened 2 or 3 years ago, and then having the context, it's important, right? So financial concerns, obviously, right? And what is that? It's exactly what we're just discussing here. It's I don't know where the money went. All these special assessments are coming up. When I ask them questions, they seem uncomfortable. They don't give me a straight answer. There seems to be blaming someone else.
Right.
So if that is your case, then I would definitely recommend that you consider doing one, right? So significant construction projects, right? So here is where it's obviously this is where the project itself kind of dictates the need here, right? So if what I mean here is, like, if you got something coming up in your HOA that is big, that that you need it, whether it's a new pool, something that needs a huge capital spending. You need to have all these organized, all of these put it as part of the projections on the reserves. If you have this, then the outcomes, it's usually better because you're more prepared.
Exactly. Yeah, right? And people feel comfortable because they know that money's already there when that time comes.
Exactly. And then you avoid the biggest thing, which is a surprise.
Right.
Right. So if you're talking with your board members, or if your board members are aware that some of this is coming up, you can kind of ease into the issue, right? Just to give you an example, let's say we're board members and we're talking about as part of a board meeting, remember that we're going to need to change our pool next year, right? So we can plan accordingly.
Right.
Okay, but so if you have big construction projects like this, then an audit or a review, it can kind of clear things, expose them how they should be. Okay, so homeowners disputes, right? It happens. It's normal. People would have different expectations of certain things. So having disputes, it's almost normal. It can even be healthy sometimes, right? Because it keeps those in check that are supposed to be doing things correctly, right? But obviously there's a line where it may cross from being something reasonable to then now it's just an all-out fight, right? And nobody trusts each other, and it's just back and forth, and and board meetings turn into high school fights. So if that happens, the answer to this is
it will give you a peace of mind. Right, and a peace of mind to the tenants, to the homeowners, that you have these items, these processes, and these items in place, and you're ready to answer any questions that they may have, and you have proof of those numbers.
Absolutely.
And the audit is definitely the biggest. It's going to give you the biggest assurance for that information.
Absolutely, because if as a board member, if an answer to something disputed is so. My reputable CPA can answer this, and they can give you some details. That's best case, right? Whereas if you have to kind of over-explain yourself and not know really what's going on, but maybe guess, it can be problematic, right?
And even if you have an AR issue, people that are not paying their dues, and you have to get an attorney involved to help you during collections, all of that also needs to be in place with the correct backup, with the correct documentation before you even turn it into your attorney.
Absolutely. And one last big one that we're going to touch in that we've seen is rapid growth, right? So HOAs are moving quickly, very fast. So obviously creates a challenge on the board to kind of keep up with everything, right? If you're in that situation, we definitely recommend that you look into additional help, right? So let's end this here, Carla, with the biggest mistakes we see, right? We kind of here want to also, I would want to mention that our goal here is to also not just, it's not to create fear, it's to provide education, right? As we mentioned, we're going to be providing down the line a webinar. We want to do a live session. If you're a member of an HOA or a board member, or you're part of an HOA, you have some questions, we're going to be there for you, right? This is our goal here.
But don't ask us, what is the minimum that I want to do or that I should do?
Right, yeah.
As a board member or as an HOA, do you, think about it. Do you really want that assurance to make sure everything, all the numbers and everything is in place? Then make the decision to whether you need an audit or a compilation or a review. But this is it's the decision of the board to decide on what they want, but don't go for the lowest price or don't go for the minimum that is needed because that might not give you what you need exactly.
Absolutely, and that's important. It's also important that you actually get a consultation, that you consult with a professional that can give you that answer, right? If as a board member you're not familiar with this, with an audit, a compilation, how does it work, what do I need, then for example here at Upfront CPA we offer a free discovery call, right? No charge, right? We meet with you, we talk about where you're at, the units, kind of what you worked in, and we obviously cannot make that determination for you, but we can put you in the right direction, right? And if we decide to work together, then even better, because then we can kind of, provide more services for you, right? But yeah, very, very, very important, right? So the biggest mistakes, right? So the biggest mistake is not even failing an audit, right? The biggest mistake is losing money, right? It's when now we're talking about legal issues, right? And as we've all maybe had experience, once you bring the law into problems, they tend to be, at the very least, more expensive. Right? So, having, financial reporting issues, misappropriation issues. Now, when we're talking about that, it's not simply, okay, so let's see what happened. Now we're talking about maybe, criminal situation. Right? And so, it's no longer an administrative thing. Now, it has raised to another level. So, it's important to understand, kind of basically what you're working with, what happens if you don't follow, if you don't comply, potential issues, and just avoid surprises.
Exactly.
Right. This is the biggest thing. So it's one thing that an auditor kind of gives you let's say an audit opinion, or maybe some things can be improved here. Because it happens, right? Especially during the first audit. It's normal that maybe you get an opinion on something. It's not the end of the world, because you're actually doing something about it. Usually that's when that first audit carries into a second audit where now, we've engaged, these issues have been resolved.
Right, and you're preventing the issue from going, becoming even a larger issue in the future by doing the audit on time.
Absolutely. So, so there's, as I mentioned at the beginning, right, there's two components. There's the financial component and then there's the trust component, right? So those two should be working together, right? So I like to close this by saying, it's a pleasure for me to be discussing this. We've been doing this for a long time. We work with many different HOAs. We basically getting calls almost on a daily basis with questions. So our goal here is to kind of get some education, right? And we like to be helpful to the community. We hate when issues come up and HOA members call us in almost despair, and they're trying to kind of figure things out, and it is expensive and a lot of hard work to sort out. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, so we're very glad to be here and explaining this. If you have any questions, if this is a topic that that interests you, if you're part of an HOA, reach out to us. Right? As I mentioned earlier, we can give you a free consultation, a discovery call. We can discuss things. We can kind of help you, put you in the right direction, so you can make the right decision, right?
Exactly. And stay tuned. Definitely, there's going to be a lot more information coming really soon about education. So please make sure that you follow us in this channel.
Absolutely. So if you like this video, please hit the like button and follow us for more content. Thank you very much.
Thank you.